Well, Mark, what a joy to have you with us today on the podcast. Thanks so much for spending time, and it's good to finally meet you.
Well, it's a joy and privilege. Can't wait.
Okay, that's great. Well, let's kind of get into it. Obviously, the new book. And so in there, you say that the best predictor of success in life, in love, and in leadership is the proficiency, of please, sorry, and thanks. That's a strong claim, but I totally agree. But let's talk about why that is true and how you got to that.
Yeah. Well, in my experience, nothing opens doors like please, nothing mends fences like sorry, and nothing builds bridges like thanks. I think those three
Mm,
words, if you're good at those three words, I think you're good to go. And I think it's true in marriage, in the workplace, even in a relationship with God. Those three words uh, really have tremendous power, especially when those words become a lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that you said that with our relationship with God, because I don't think we always think about that. Maybe we do a lot of pleases, but sometimes we forget the sorries and thank yous. But I think that's such an important thing for us to do. Uh, so most of us, I mean, my mom, if I didn't say please and thank you growing up, it was well, I got talked to. It was like, no, this is the way you're supposed to do that. But I think we grow up with that and we get in a culture. And, I think sometimes we think, well, some of the younger generation doesn't say it as much. And I love it when I hear people younger than me saying that, just because I think it was ingrained in me. And I so agree with you. I think it makes such a difference. But why do people have trouble with today? Why do they need a reminder to do that? And because we live in a really rough culture right now, and
We
kindness
do.
is not on the tips of everybody's tongue.
It's not. There is a tremendous amount of political polarization. And of course, I pastor a church in Washington, D.C., so we
Yeah.
feel those tensions all the time. And there's kind of a basic lack of civility or even common grace. And so I do think on one level, we just need a rising tide of please, sorry, and thanks to change the tone of the conversation. I
Hmm.
actually think these words are postures in a sense that,
Mm.
if I'm going to understand you, I have to stand under you for a minute. I have to
Mm.
listen long enough, and I may not agree, but I have to listen long enough to really understand. And it might be interesting, Kim, for me to share just right up front four principles of peacemaking, because that's kind of what
Absolutely.
it kind of comes to mind that, we need to listen well,
Mm.
ask anything, disagree freely, and love regardless. And those four things are hard to come by today. And, I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know. There is a lot of trolling and baiting and canceling. And I just think common grace has gone out the window. And we've kind of turned each other into common enemy. If we don't
Yes.
look alike, vote alike, think alike, but the problem with that is this: at a very fundamental level, the image of God in me greets the image of God in you, that we are made in the image
Mm.
of God. So I don't think we're given the luxury of treating people as anything less than the image of God. And so I do think that I hope and pray Please Sorry Thanks is one of those books that maybe creates a little bit of a rising tide in culture, and we can recapture some of that civility. And I also think it's good theology.
Well, and I think it's so timely for where we are right now, because as a counselor, I see it when I'm in the counseling room with people. I see people's stories. The battles that go on social media, Facebook, and things. It's just like, wow. And so I don't think we give grace very well, and it's like we've got to be right and they've got to be wrong. I love what you started with listen, though, because I think as a culture we don't do that very well. Do you agree?
I do, and you're the professional, Kim. I think you reflective listen for a living, but I think for all of us, the Apostle James said, "Be slow to speak and quick to listen." And maybe if we used our two ears and our one mouth in that proportion, the world would be a better place, and we would have a lot more understanding. I think, most of us listen in order to formulate our response instead of
Mm.
really listening to, I at least want to understand. I don't agree with you, but I at least want to understand why you think what you think, and give a measure of grace to those that we may not agree with.
So yes, I think it's really easy for us to, while someone else is talking, to be formulating what we're going to say next and how we're going to counter what they're saying, and then that just didn't go well, does it?
It really doesn't. It turns into more of a monologue than a dialogue.
Yeah, and I think, of course, and we take it into a marriage situation. If I'm not listening to my wife Nancy, and then I have this great comeback or something, and she thinks, "Well, you didn't listen to the thing I said." So
Yep.
consequences are probably different in different settings, but in a marriage, you want your spouse, you want to listen to your spouse, and I think we get so, I don't know, it's so easy for us, I think, to tune out today, or if it sounds a little bit like it's not something we're going to agree with, that we don't want to hear it, and so we think, okay, how are we going to fight back?
Yeah. And if I step back a little bit, Kim, I think part of the challenge that we face is that our technology has taken us to a place where the face-to-face relationship, um, well, I mean, we live in a very digital,
Hmm.
virtual reality, and so I don't think we were designed to know everything about everyone all the time. In fact, in some ways, I think social media can seem like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that we don't
Yeah.
have the emotional capacity, even with real time news. And all of us, our hearts break when there is tragedy, when there
Sure.
is an earthquake in Turkey,
Mm.
or there's a mass shooting somewhere else. I mean, these things are heartbreaking. The
Yes.
challenge is it's hard for us as a single individual to be able to handle all of that emotion, all of that grief. And then you really don't have much left over for the personal intimate relationships, be it marriage or family. And so we find ourselves in a culture where there just are a lot of voices competing for airtime, and unfortunately, all too often, the loudest voice wins when it probably shouldn't be the loudest voice that's
Yeah.
winning.
So do you ever recommend to people, or to just get off the social media for a while, or to just get away from the news for a while?
I do. I think it's a powerful way to fast. We think about
Mm.
fasting as giving up food for a time, which is powerful,
Sure.
but I'll occasionally do a silent retreat where for 24 hours I just, and no inputs, and it's a little bit of ear cleansing, and it's soul cleansing. And so I think we've got to find a way to dial down some of those voices, some of the white noise, and
Hmm.
make sure that the still small voice of the Holy Spirit is the loudest voice in our lives. And
Right.
so, the question I'm asking these days is, what percentage of your thoughts, words, and actions are a regurgitation of the media you're watching or social media you're following, and what percentage is a revelation you're getting from God's word? We've got to make sure that we're controlling our inputs, so that our thoughts and our speech and our behavior begin to line up the way that they should.
Absolutely. A couple of things I've started doing that I think really kind of tie in and help is I found a new service that just gives me bullet points, and I look at that because I do want to know what's going on in the world. I don't want to feel like I'm sticking my head in the sand. And if I want to
Yeah.
go in more depth, I can, but I'm not bombarded with it. It kind of lets me know. And the other thing, it just kind of what you're saying with your 24-hour fast is just unplugging on Sunday. And Mark, it was hard to start with. I wanted to go to my computer. I wanted to pull my phone out, but I'm getting better at it. And I'm seeing the value in it. And we just need to do that, don't you think?
We do. We get dopamine hits the wrong way. And
Yes.
unfortunately, sometimes we get it from the likes on social media, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's where we should be taking our cues from. And so I'm with you. I let's not bury our heads in the sand, but we've got to make sure that those things are getting filtered in the right way. And part of that has to do with what defining what your values are, what you believe in,
Mm,
and then having those convictions to guide you. And
absolutely.
so that's true in life, and I think for the record it's true in marriage too. You got to know what are those values, what are those
Absolutely.
convictions. In fact, I remember for a long time we had a little note card on our mirror when our kids were younger that said, "Choose your battles wisely," because if you don't, everything's a battle.
Yes.
And so you have to begin to define those things so that you're not living reactively, but you're living proactively out of those values.
I think that's so true. I think we just don't choose our battles wisely a lot anymore. We just don't do that. Yeah, and I think I love what you're saying about just in marriage as a couple. I think it's good conversation for a couple. How are we going to handle this? How are we going to handle? Because I've worked with couples where one of them has just gotten consumed with social media into it, and they're fighting every battle. But it was affecting the marriage, like you said. You use all your energy up during the day, and then when you get home together, it's like I don't have anything left for you, and that's not good. And so I think if couples can have that conversation and say, how are we going to handle this? And like you said, what are our priorities? Is God really first and each other second? Then we need to do some things different.
Yeah. Well, and some of that I think requires the self-awareness to know how different things are affecting us.
Mm,
If some of those inputs, be it media or social media, are affecting us negatively, um, those that we love most or spend the most time with are going to feel some of that effect. So I think being able to identify that. I was actually from a therapist in our church. I was introduced to this idea of allostatic load, uh,
hmm,
or allostatic overload. This idea of the cumulative stress, where you just kind of hit this point where you're just carrying this huge backpack on your shoulders, and all too often we accumulate these stressors, or we have negative interactions in the workplace, and then we bring that home instead of taking the backpack off outside the front door. And then the next thing you
mm.
know, that those stressors begin to find their way into the marriage, and that's not a prescription for a happy, healthy, holy marriage, I don't think.
No, no. And I think if someone's like listening or watching today and say they're seeing this in their spouse and they're concerned, would you advise them to confront it, to get it on the table?
Yeah, and I think the first thing I would do is make sure you know their love language, and so speak it in their language,
Absolutely.
and maybe maybe soften the soil a little bit before you deliver the that news of the way it's affecting you. But yes, I think we've got to have ways of just honestly evaluating the effect that things are having, and sometimes we don't know the effect that it's having on
Right.
our husband or wife. So um, they aren't us and we aren't them. I mean, I've been married 30 years, but um, my wife is still figuring me out, and I'm still figuring her
Yeah.
out.
Well, Nancy, I've been married 53 years, and we still learn things about each other because I think over time we change and God grows us and changes us. And so, yeah, I tell somebody if you're getting bored and you're married, you're not really spending time with each other because I don't think you can learn everything about a spouse in a lifetime. There's just so
No.
much, and we get away from that. So let's go back to some of the words. Please does seem easy. But what keeps us from using it? What stands in the way of us using please
Well,
consistently?
I think we want what we want when we want it.
Mm,
And this is going to sound so simplistic, but when I'm doing premarital counseling with couples, one of the things that I'll say is the quickest way to a dissatisfied marriage is just focus on getting your needs met. You just focus
yeah.
on getting your needs met. And it's going to be a long, hard road. But if you begin to focus on what does my spouse need, then it changes the game, because as you begin to care for that person, then it becomes this reciprocal kind of thing. And
Hmm.
so I think with please, it's even when something is within our right, or even in the workplace where someone works for you, it still is a lot more effective to ask than to tell, and to put the ball in their court. And that's what the word please does. It's just and it has to be authentic, it has to be
Sure.
sincere, and it works in marriage as well. A pretty please will get you a lot further than any kind of
Yes.
demand or nagging or threats.
Yeah, and it seems like it kind of softens everything going into it. If I'm saying please, I think maybe I get someone's attention better. Maybe they listen to what I'm saying better, because I think we're so used to people coming off harsh or strong, or I think we stay in a defensive mode so much. I think that can really soften things.
It really can, and it empowers the other person. It's a word of honor. It's a
Mm,
word
I
of
love that.
respect. I respect your time. I respect your thoughts. I respect your resources. And so that please has a way of leveling the playing field. And I just think the the plane the ground is level at the foot of the cross is kind of how I
Mm,
like to say it.
yeah.
And I think it's true with that word please. It has a leveling effect, that this isn't one upmanship. It's not about, in fact, greatest of all is the servant of all. So there's something about putting yourself in that posture of please. I think please washes other people's feet. And when it
Oh, that's
does
nice.
that, then it has a way of creating this healthy equilibrium in a relationship.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking of people listening today and just thinking, well, yeah, if my husband did that, I would do it. But what if they just today said, I'm going to start saying please to my spouse and just see what happens? Don't you think they'd see something different? I mean, their
I
spouse's head may spin around a couple times, but you're going to start something different.
Yeah, and I think you have to be the change that you want to
Yes.
see. So you've got to set the tone, and that might even lead into this word sorry. That
Yeah.
it's one thing. It's hard to say sorry, but it's really hard to be the first person to say sorry, and
Yes.
that's where taking the initiative with these words, I think, is where you can really see a profound impact on your relationship.
Absolutely. Early in our marriage, Nancy was always quick to say sorry, so I didn't. I didn't have to be the first to say it, and I think she finally figured out this is not. He's never saying it at first, and so I remember we had a talk back then, and I think we both use it easy now. But I think sometimes it is, whether it's our pride or whatever gets in. Like, well, when they say it, we'll say it, and yet I think it just begins the healing process, whatever that needs to be in a relationship, when you say it. And I think you can
Yeah.
have fun with it. I think just as you think of these three words and just saying, God, help me to recall those, help me to use these today, and then just see the results. I think people are going to be just really pleased in the response they get in a marriage that's pretty healthy anyway, or at least working toward that. Certainly in some difficult situations or abusive, that probably ain't going to work in the way we're talking about. But most marriages, that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, and I love something about the way that you said that, Kim, makes me think that these words are a science. And of course, I talk about psychology of please, the science of sorry,
Yeah.
and the theology of thanks, but they're also an art form. And there are ways of being really creative with these things, and just being intentional with it.
Hmm.
This is I just had this kind of thought fire across my synapses that I have a spiritual father who's 80 years old, who
Oh,
is a
wow.
brilliant question asker. And, he'll ask questions like, who left their fingerprints on your soul?
Ooh,
Questions that are said in a way that really make you think. But whenever we talk, he normally doesn't start with asking me how I am. He'll say, how's Laura, my wife? And he
mm,
knows that how my wife is doing is a huge reflection on how I'm doing, uh, and how I'm doing as a husband. So I think just, asking questions is another one of those things. Occasionally, we'll even pull out one of those deck of cards that are questions that kind of
yeah.
help you dialogue about interesting things, just to go a little bit deeper in your conversation, as opposed to maybe, the logistics of picking up kids from school, or kind of the latest challenge in the
Yeah.
workplace. You've got to find ways to keep going a little bit deeper than that.
No, I think that's really good because, and I get that with families. I see that, and they, 3 or 4 kids, or even 2 kids, or 1 kid. At certain ages, you're so busy with all that, and just one of the things I try to get couples, you've got to set aside time for each other, but doing these little things by saying I'm sorry, things like that. No, you're not having a 15-minute conversation, but you're saying something that connects you with your spouse, right? And
Yeah,
there's a bridge there. Yeah.
there
Um,
is.
let's go in sorry. I also have couples that I've had someone say, well, yeah, he says sorry, but I don't think he really means it. So how do we get past that? What's the difference between a real apology and an empty apology?
Well, it's pretty simple. You follow up. What are you sorry about?
Ah, so good. Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
and we do that with our kids, right? Because if our kids don't know what they're sorry for, they're going to do the same exact thing over again.
Sure.
So I do think I've been guilty more than a time or two of saying sorry, but only because I want the argument to end, not because I
Yeah.
have any idea what I'm sorry about. But that's treating a symptom instead of the root cause. I might say that, on the sorry front, I think taking ownership for it takes two to tango. Every
Yeah.
problem is complicated, and there's layers. It's like a layer cake. And the truth is, all of us have a little piece of that. And so I think it's
Mm.
important to own your piece, and then that allows someone else to own their piece. And so
Yes.
one thing that might help, um, I remember in grad school, I was fascinated by Milton Erickson, and
Mm.
some of his therapist techniques, which I'm sure both of us, we don't probably embrace all of them, because he was pretty far out there. But
Yeah.
I do remember this. I think from one of his books, he said you need some ground rules, that when you're going to have an argument, you have to do it in the shower fully clothed, which just sounds crazy, but it's enough to kind of disrupt the status quo.
Yeah.
And what are we doing standing in a shower fully clothed arguing? And what he was trying to do, and my counselor says it this way: I want you to operate a little out of your programming. And so we've got to find ways, I think, in marriage to have ground rules and operate a little outside of our programming to resolve some of those issues. And for the record, Kim, thanks for doing what you do. I think that I am actually praying that God would raise up another generation of counselors and therapists, uh, because we're going to need more of you in the days to come.
Well,
So
thank
thanks
you.
thanks for doing what you do.
And I do. I feel the same way you do, and I trust that God will do that. He certainly called me, and I love what I do. And I think that it's hard in a lot of ways, but it's so rewarding in so many ways. And so yeah, I agree with you. I hope God is right now touching these young people and saying, "Hey, here's what I'd like you to do," because just speaking around my grandkids that are teenagers and just saying, I see some of their friends and I think, oh my gosh, should be a good counselor. And then I'll usually ask them, do your friends talk to you? Yeah, they ask me questions all the time. They come to me with their problems. I thought, yeah, someday you need to
Yep.
think about being a counselor
Yep. I
because
love it.
it, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the list of good questions in the chapter that's called Secret Sauce. These are great for any relationship. So share kind of a little bit about those questions, what they are.
Yeah. Well, I think questions are going to, uh, a good question in my mind, Kim, is better than a good answer. And the reason why I
Ah,
say that is that it's going to facilitate conversation at a level that I think is going to, is going to help us process at a deeper level. I
mm,
would back up one step and say, I'm always curious about people's Myers Briggs letters or Enneagram numbers
right.
or Strengths Finders combination. But, if you got a thinker and a feeler talking, well, the thinker is probably going to ask, what do you think? Instead of what do you feel? And the feeler is
Mm,
probably going to say, what do you feel? Instead of what do you think?
right.
And they're almost talking two different languages. So I think, learning to ask open-ended questions that aren't just yes or
Yes.
no, learning to ask echo questions that here's what I'm hearing, but am I hearing you right? Um, and then the last one, I love curveball questions, questions that I did not see that coming. Um,
Hmm.
and so I'm a connoisseur of questions. Just not long ago, I was with someone who said, "Hey, tell me how you're doing on a scale of 1 to 10, but the answer can't be 7."
Oh,
I'm
that's
like,
good.
"Yeah," because what he had found is that everybody says 7 because
Seven.
it's so
It's
safe,
right. It's
right?
right. It is.
Because if you say 8, like you're doing pretty good and you better substantiate that. And if you're a 6, that's close to a 5. And you
Yeah.
better know why you're doing that way. So I think it's a fun chapter that I think will begin to help couples maybe communicate at a level that is a little bit more like ping pong back and forth
Mm,
as opposed to just a monologue.
that's awesome. Well, you just taught me something because I do 1 to 10 all the time with couples. I'm going to add the 7 in there. You can't use 7. Yeah, that's awesome.
I love it.
That's so.
I love it.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think maybe some people are listening and watching this, Mark, and they're saying, "Yeah, that sounds good, but that's a lot of work." But so, what would you say to that? If
And
someone says
any
this,
yeah, I mean anything worth doing is worth hard work. If we're gonna listen, if you got married, you signed up for this.
mm,
No one said it was
absolutely.
gonna be easy, and you've got to work at it. And so I think, I last year I biked a century, Kim, with my oldest son because I've learned that you have to be a student of your kids, and if
Oh
you
yeah,
do what they love to do, you'll have ongoing relationship. It was really hard to train for that 100-mile bike ride, but
I
I did
bet.
it out of love. And so in the
Yeah.
same sense, please, sorry, and thanks, they're simple words, but it takes some hard work to get good at it. But they pay dividends when you get good at these three words. It's this rising tide that's going to float your marriage. It's going to help the workplace, and even on a cultural level. I just think if our culture got just a little bit better at please, sorry, and
Mm.
thanks, it would be a new day. It would be a different day.
Even if we just said each one of them one time during the day, it'd be better than
Yeah,
a lot of what we have. You know.
yeah,
A
absolutely.
couple of couples come to mind that I work with that I think are going to love this, and I think they're almost going to see it as something that's fun to do. It's just kind of where they are. The healing has taken place, and they're kind of ready to take a next step. And really, I could see some couples just saying, "I'm going to outdo you. I bet I can out-sorry you today. I bet I can out-please you today," and just get that habit because I think you said a little bit earlier we get in these cycles, and whether it's sitting in the shower or whether it's, okay, we're going to do this more, you got to break those cycles or you're going to
Yep.
stay in them. And you just keep repeating the same thing over and over and thinking, why isn't anything getting better?
Yeah. You have to make or break the habits that are going to make or break you. And that now kind of gets to that third word, thanks, because let me just share a really practical thing that's been so good for our marriage. We Sabbath from Sunday night to Monday night because I pastor a church.
Sure.
So we begin that Sabbath by sharing gratitudes that,
So
and it just creates this positive energy over the last week. What are you grateful for? And what's so interesting is my wife will find things that she's grateful for that, oh, I forgot about that, or I didn't notice that. And it almost is like we double each other's gratitude just by walking through that process. Um, and then, even at the end of the year, calendar year, we do a 2-day retreat where we do budget and calendar, and we may try to come up with a word of the year, or verse of the year. But we're also spending a lot of time just what are we grateful for? I think the theology of thanks can be such a bonding thing for a couple. In fact, I remember, Kim, hearing Gary Smalley say this one time that most marriages are about 80% good, 20% bad. But the difference between a happy marriage and an unhappy marriage is whether you focus on the 80% or the 20%.
so
And,
good.
and he would be the first person to have said, like, work on the 20%, like, don't ignore the 20%.
Right.
But you have to remind yourself of why you love this person and why are you married to this person. You have to focus on those positives because your focus will determine your reality. And I think thanks is about a focus. It's focusing on the things that you are grateful for, and then it begins to feed that flywheel of gratitude.
Absolutely. That's so good. It's so good. Yeah, I think it's just getting in the habit. It is. It's a great habit to have of just to do those things on a
It
consistent
is. and
basis.
and to me, marriage, like everything else, are the day in, day out, week in, week out habits, be they good or bad, that are going to make or break that relationship. And it's hard to change habits, but that's where you've got to find ways to, um, during different seasons, you may try a gratitude for 40 days. Like,
Yeah.
maybe it's hard for you to commit for the rest of your life. I get that. But
Yeah.
could you do something for X number of days and then see what kind of effect it has on your relationship?
Oh, yeah, I think it'll have an immense effect because I think it's so true how many times we focus on the 20%. And 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 if we're not focusing on the 80%, that 20 could be 30 at some point, because we're just
Yeah.
not doing that. And I love that because I think it connects us. I think and I think it too, just asking God to help us see things we're grateful for. And I try to get couples to do that. They're at a hard time. Sometimes I'll say, well, why'd you get married? Well, he was really nice back then. He blah blah blah. And I said, well, when did it change? And just trying to help them get back in touch with why they married each other, and that can
Yeah.
still be rekindled. And I think we just have a tendency to let life get in the way of it, and like you said, we don't get intentional about the things that are really going to make a difference in our marriage. That's so
Yeah.
good.
No,
So
no doubt.
so let's talk about God for a minute. Fostering bitterness and how that does block our intimacy with God. How does that happen?
Well, I want to be as unoffendable as I can be, Kim. That's one of my goals, is to the glory of a man to overlook an offense. Because if you let a seed of bitterness get into your heart, you know what I found? You can't even look that person in the eye anymore. And
Yeah.
to me, the solution for that is to begin to pray for them. And so when I pray for someone, now I'm able to look them in the eye. But, it was a counselor who took me through a forgiveness exercise that was really a game changer for me. just said, hey, take some time. Is there anyone or anything that you have not forgiven? And I thought it would take 2 minutes. And 2 hours later, I was still identifying that,
Yeah.
oh, I have accumulated some bitterness, some unforgiveness. And so, whatever we don't confess, we repress. And then, whatever we repress really begins to depress. And so, this ancient truth of confessing sin,
Mm.
whether you even believe in the Bible or believe in God, I think it's the way we're hardwired as humans. Like
I go,
if you don't forgive, it's going to be this backpack that you carry around, and it's going to weight you down, and you're also letting someone live in your head rent free. So
right.
uh, don't do it. You got to practice this. Sorry, let it go. You have to cut the cord, pray a prayer of release, and forgive them the way that God forgives us. And then it's kind of a fresh start. It's a reset that allows us to really renew our relationship.
Hmm. Because really, you're still giving that person power in your life in a negative way when you don't forgive.
You are, and you're letting them dictate the terms. You cannot control them. You cannot make them feel differently about you, but you can control. You have responsibility, the ability to respond. And
Mm.
so, in my experience, listen, if Jesus on a cross said, "Father, forgive
Mm.
them, for they know not what they do," then I've got to be willing to forgive others. And marriage to me is the crucible in which we learn to love another imperfect person. I kind of like to think of marriage as a unconditional commitment to an imperfect person. and
Yeah.
and and when you do that, you begin to understand the way that God loves us.
Yeah, because I think we come in with some very unrealistic expectations sometime, and it is we're imperfect. I mean, and so I agree. One thing I was thinking though, as you were saying that, and I love what you were saying about your counselor, and you thought this will take me 2 minutes, and then 2 hours later. I think too. I think praying about that and asking God. I think it's a dangerous prayer, so you got to be willing to work through it. But to ask God, God, surface. Do I have any bitterness? Do I have any unforgiveness in me? Would you surface that, and then take the time either to journal or listen to that and see what God brings up? It'll be hard, don't you think? But I think it's a big step toward healing.
It is, and it's healthy, holy, and it will set you free.
Yeah.
I think that most of us are carrying more unforgiveness and more bitterness than we know, and that is where the Holy Spirit can begin to surface some old hurts that He wants to heal. And
Absolutely.
so you have to do the hard work, though. You have to have the courage to take a long, hard look in the mirror and to evaluate how you really feel about others. But if you're willing to do the hard work, that's the thing that could pay the most dividends in your life.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I don't believe one. I think God will show up in those prayers because I think He wants that for us, and two, so people know God's not going to reveal anything that He's not going to give us the way out, the answer to it, right?
Yeah. And He's so good at
Yeah,
helping us figure out how do we untangle those knots inside of us, and he's the one who helps us do it. The
yeah,
reality is that um, I think in some instances, forgiveness is the greatest miracle, to be able to
mm,
come to a point, because there are so many people that have been genuinely hurt,
mm,
um, physical, verbal, sexual. There are so many people that have been violated in ways that it's hard for me to even imagine, that it
yes,
takes the Holy Spirit's help. And you're not saying that what they did is okay. It's not okay. But
right,
someone has said that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and thinking that it'll kill the rat. No, it's gonna
Yes.
poison you. And so
Yeah.
I'm hoping that that middle part of this book, Please, Sorry, Thanks, will help people walk through and do the hard work of forgiveness. And it's not easy, but it's the thing that can really set you free. The truth will set you free.
Absolutely. It's the book is what can really make changes that will make your life, your marriage so much better, because you're really asking God to help you live your life the way He wants you to live it, aren't you?
Yeah,
Those are
and
things
it's coming into alignment with that good, pleasing, and perfect will. And
yeah,
He's the God who even stands at the door and knocks. He doesn't break the door down. Romans 2:4 says that God's kindness leads us to repentance. So when God wants us to change, He shows us kindness, and if that doesn't work, He shows us more kindness. And so we probably ought to follow suit in our marriages.
absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about marriage a little bit. Let's talk about shifting the atmosphere in a home. We at Also Marriage got a lot of questions about people who really want to do that. They know change needs to take place. They want to do it, but their spouse isn't on board. So what can they do?
Well, and that is a challenging situation. Let's acknowledge that up front.
Right.
But I think there's this old uh, adage that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So you do have to have a sense of timing that, in fact, John, I think it's John 16:12. It says Jesus had so much more to say, more than they could now bear. In other
Mm,
words, you have to make sure that there's a readiness, that someone else's heart is ready to hear what you have to say. And sometimes our timing is way off.
yeah.
We say the right thing at the wrong time, and it backfires. So I think part of this is the art form of please, sorry, and thanks, and getting good at reading our spouse, or at really discerning when they're ready to hear what we have to say. So that's not easy, but relationship over time, you learn how to say things in a way that they can hear it. Otherwise, what you're really doing is just getting things off of your chest. And all that's going to
Right.
do is make you feel a little bit better, but it won't help the relationship in the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So really just start with please, sorry, thanks. And just kind of do that for a while and see how your spouse responds, because you want to get that to that point where when you do say something to your spouse that's important, that they're willing to hear it. And so you got to lay some groundwork, right?
Yep. And you start simple. Those words become a lifestyle. And the next thing you know, there's a different atmosphere, there's a different tone and a different posture. And that's how change starts to happen. And you begin to speak those things, and there's the power of life and death is in the tongue. And so our
Absolutely.
words have a way of making a huge difference. And so I often pray about what to say and how to say it. And
Hmm.
I think that's true, not just as a communicator on a stage, but as a communicator in a relationship. How can I say this in a way that is going to be best received? But I do think it comes back to those three pretty simple yet hard words to say: please, sorry, thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's so much that goes into that. And I think praying and maybe counsel, you may need somebody listening may need to go to a Christian counselor and say, hey, I want to make some changes. I don't think my husband or wife is going to come to counseling, and let them kind of help walk you through that. And certainly prayer, um, scripture, all the tools that God gives us to make changes that will make a difference for us.
Yeah.
The book is amazing. One last question: what are you loving about your marriage today?
I love the fact that the longer we're married, the more I appreciate my wife's integrity.
Mm,
And, it's an accomplishment to be faithful to one another. And, relationships change. Our three kids are in their 20s now, so it's a different dynamic. But I'm just so grateful. I often tell people that marry someone who loves to worship God. And that sounds like
Mm,
funny advice, but my wife, her heart for God challenges me and blesses me, and I think it's gotten us through some tough times. And we've been through two bouts with cancer on her part, breast cancer, over the last
mm,
5 years, and she's doing great. She's on the other side of radiation and doing
that's
well.
awesome.
But you walk through tough times, Kim, and it gives relationship dimensionality. And
Absolutely.
a lot of laughs over the years, but a lot of tears too. But it gives that relationship texture, that it's a love that is far more tenuous and has a tenacity to it, a little bit of grit to it, that we're going to keep on loving each other till
Yeah,
death do us part. And so I just am grateful that we hope and pray that we get to grow old together, God willing.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that, and I think it is. I think you just grow together and you value each other, and you see each other grow. But as I was thinking, I mean, honestly, Nancy and I were talking about this not too long ago. The times we've grown were the hard times, and we didn't like it when they came. We certainly didn't want them to come, but how God uses that to connect you and to grow you closer to each other and to Him. And sure, they're the joyful times of when kids are born and grandkids and stuff like that. But those hard times is what's made a difference going through those together in our marriage. So I totally agree with you. And it just, I don't know, it's something like when in your marriage, when you experience things with each other like that, there's a closeness and intimacy that comes with that. That's really, really special. You've said that
Yeah.
very well. Well, the book is Please, Sorry, Thanks, the 3 words that change everything. It is out. You can buy it anywhere books are sold. And if people want to connect with you other ways, Mark, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, markbatterson.com or Mark Batterson on Twitter or Instagram, and would love to connect in those places.
Absolutely. And if you're in DC, National Community Church probably has a seat for you, right?
We absolutely do. Swing by. We're right on Capitol Hill, not far from the Capitol building itself.
Wow. Mark, thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being part of the Awesome Marriage Podcast today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim. God bless.